Hi, Kevin Ledoux at Ledoux Guitars, the Pragmatic Luther, back again. Today, I've got something for beginning guitar makers, maybe people who have not ever built an instrument, or someone who has built one, two, 10, doesn't matter, a few instruments maybe from other known patterns. You know, maybe you've built an OM or a Dreadnought, and you've done it from patterns and pre-made templates and plans and things. And today I thought I'd like to show you how you can lay out a guitar of your own design. As you know, I encourage that sort of thing. I encourage people to make their own tooling and do as much of your own processing as you can do. So if you have an interest in trying this, designing your own body and designing your scale length into it and so on, and making all your patterns, this might be something that you're very interested in. So a couple of decisions have to be made first. Now, I guess the first thing you need to do is decide, about what size body are you after, and therefore what size scale length are you after. Now, we could debate what scale length you should put with any given size body until I'm dead, which might not even be that long. Who knows? But we could debate that all day and all night and probably not come to any conclusive answers. I would suggest that if you're designing an instrument, stick to some known scale lengths, a 24.9, 25.4. There are other popular scale lengths that you can easily do. And if you need measurements for those scale lengths, I keep a notebook here with all kinds of specifications for my own guitars. And I've got a chart here for every fret position for, this is what, a 24.25 inch scale length. But you can also go, I don't think it's inappropriate to tout Stuart McDonald's, but I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not being subsidized by them. But they've got on their website, in the free information, probably a lot of you know this, but you can get fret positions for any scale length you want. That will make the process a little easier. So the first thing that I do is I contemplate body size and scale length and try and put those together in my mind. Now the next thing, pardon me for turning my back on the camera, the next thing I'm going to do is just make up a large piece of paper like this, and I'm going to make up a long strip of paper like this, 6 inches wide and good 36 inches long, maybe a little longer if you're going to do maybe an acoustic bass guitar. So those are the first things you'll need, because you're going to make a paper body pattern and a paper scale pattern. We'll go from there. So I've got my large piece of paper here. This is, I don't know, 18 by 24, I think it is. And I've drawn a center line on it. Center line does not need to be perfectly centered. That doesn't matter, because we're working around that center line. We don't care about the squareness of the paper even. So I think the first thing that I do is I decide how long is my body. And before we go any further, I want to tell you that you may do this 5 or 6 times, and that's perfectly all right, because this is the same thing as writing a rough draft for an essay or a paragraph or a news article or something. You may have to go through this several times. So I'm going to decide, given what I have in mind here, how long is my body? Well, I'm going to set that body, I'm going to set it at 19.5 inches. So I'm going to mark each one of those limits. And then I think I'm probably going to make a decision just for aesthetic purposes, or giving me an idea where I want to go. I'm going to, excuse me for turning away from the camera, but I'm going to grab this handy fret scale. You could use the charts I showed you before if you wanted. I'm going to look at, given a scale length, I'm going to look at the 14th fret. I'm going to put it at the top of my body. I'm going to mark where the E string will set, and I'm going to mark the 22nd fret and the 21st fret, the 20th, because that gives me an idea of where my sound hole is likely to be. And you could even set up your Luther's compass. Make sure it's a Luther's compass now. You could even set that up and kind of make a decision as to where the center of your sound hole is. See, I'm just roughing that in. And I pointed out those fret positions because I want a fret position to be right where the sound hole is or very close to it. You may have some variation on that, but this gets you kind of centered as to where you want to be. So I hope you can see this okay. I'm going to make some decisions now as to approximately how wide is the body at its widest point. Where is the waist? Is the waist is down here? Do I want that waist well below the sound hole, much closer to it? And where's my lower bout? What are the limits out there? And usually, well, I'm just, for the heck of it, I'm just going to say I want this guitar to be about 16 inches wide at the lower bout. So you can see, if I put that up to the camera, maybe you can see that I've just got some really rough pencil marks on there. And pardon my camera setup. It's, filming with an iPhone. What can I tell you? So all I'm going to do now is I am just going to draw lines. I'm just going to come out here and draw that guitar. And yep, it might look a little clumsy. That's the way it's going to be. And look at that. That's really disgusting. But I'm going to keep at it until I arrive at what I want. And your mind's eye is going to guide you. I'm sketching very roughly. But eventually, you're going to zero in on what it is you're after. And I'm sure you're sitting there watching this thinking, that is disgusting. How did this guy ever arrive at a guitar? But I assure you that if you keep sketching, you'll arrive at this. Now, another thing that you could do, if you're just not patient enough for this, or you don't have any confidence in that, you could take a known pattern. Let's pretend that this is maybe an OM pattern, which it is not. You'll never find one of those in my shop. But you could put that on your center line, and you could lightly trace around it. And I'm saying lightly for a reason, because I don't want that line to be too predominant. I don't even know if you can see it on camera, but it's there. What I can do now is I can manipulate that and make some changes in it. I want a shallower waist possibly. So I'm going to come out here, and what happens if we bring this up and square it off a little more, maybe sort of dreadnought fashion, something like that, but smaller. Okay, so I've got that. Now I want that waist to jut right out there like so, and swing around from down below. I like to work from both ends. That, for me, that works a little better. Okay, so now if you look at that, it's beginning to look a little more guitar-esque than what I had before. And I'll be the first to admit, you do this from a blank page, boy, it can be a real process till you finally get what you want. Although, if you happen to have an artistic hand and maybe some art background and better fine motor control than I do, you could probably do this much more quickly. So let's pretend that I got what I wanted here. Let's just pretend that I'm done with this and I'm happy. I only need one side. I don't need to draw a matching side, and I'm sure you can guess why. Because I'm going to fold that in half and I'm going to cut it out with a knife. Now, I'm not going to bother you with that because anybody can do that. But I'm going to show you half patterns that I've made and unfolded them. And there is one body. Here is another one. And still another. Now, I will tell you that all of these bodies they're labeled somewhere on each piece of paper. They're labeled waste. These are not useful bodies at all. I don't like them, and that's the only reason. But I keep them because if I want to draw another smaller guitar, I'll just use the pattern paper all over again. And while I'm here, you know, I said I don't like these. If you cut one of these out, it's real easy to look at a pattern and say, whoop, I've got it. There it is. I really like that. And then when you cut it out on paper, quite frequently you'll look at that and say, oh my God, that just doesn't look right at all. I don't like that. But I've found from experience that if you get one that you think you really like, even when you open it up, it's a good idea to take that and hang that on the wall for about 2 or 3 weeks and keep glancing at it. And you may find that in just 3 or 4 days, you'll start to notice things about that you don't like. But when you finally arrive at the pattern you like, you're in business. Once you have the paper pattern that you like, then you're going to fold that in half. You're going to lay that on a sheet of, in this case, plain masonite. You could do this with acrylic. You can do it with thin plywood. You could even use just heavy paper. It won't last long and it's fragile, but this is very heavy paper used to be used to cut shoe patterns. This will hold up for a while, but I like to make my patterns quite permanent. So I like plywood or this masonite or hardboard in 1/8 inches. I think a little better than quarter sometimes, but you can choose whatever material you want. The reason I like sheet goods or composites or acrylics is because they're absolutely stable. If you make this, of course, out of a slat of wood that you've got down to a 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch thick, it's going to move on you and it'll change the shape of your guitar. But you're going to trace that out, and then of course you're going to cut that out on a bandsaw. You could cut it out with a jigsaw. If you're patient enough, you could cut it out with a coping saw close to the line and then refine that with your spindle sander or whatever scrapers, files, knives, whatever you have to work with in your shop to refine that curve. And each time you do that, you know, you want to refine that very carefully and make sure that it's the shape you want. And if it isn't exactly the shape you want, sorry, toss it and try it again. Sometimes you do get this far and it still doesn't work out. Just toss it, maybe keep it to make a smaller instrument, but do that. A couple of advisory things maybe for those of you who are not experienced. This guitar body is rounded at the lower bout. Can you see that? This is rounded. That's going to be a little bit more difficult to fabricate, but not terrible. But up here, where the heel block goes, for about 1 3/4 or 1.5 inches is plenty. This wants to evolve to being square with the center line because your heel block is going to go in here. This is where your neck joint goes. So you're going to want that probably square. And it can be difficult to make that transition, to make that come up, but you can do it. You can also put on your pattern. I have all kinds of information on my patterns. Let's see, what have we got here? I've got the 14th fret. I've got 12th fret for whatever I need to do. This pattern is for a 25.4 scale. This is an instrument that I only build in that scale. So I have all of that information. Here's E string position and so on. E string position for a 12 fret guitar. You can put any information on those that happens to be useful to you. And I put my model numbers on them. If you're going to make a bunch of guitars or you're really going to get into this, I put my model numbers on them, and I even put a date on them and sign them, because you'll notice, for example, this one says LMJ, that's my name, Ledoux or Ledoux Mini Jumbo. It's a 3rd generation because this is the 3rd iteration of this body that I've designed in the last 30 years. So stuff like that is just kind of fun to have around. The next thing that I do is take my narrow strip of long paper and I put a center line on it, and then at some point there I mark the zero end of the fretboard, and I've labeled it. This is my personal neck taper. I make my necks a little bit different than some. Mine are not standard for my own purposes. But I marked a center line, as you can see here, and I have marked the outer edge of the fingerboard here and out here. And then in here, I've put the strings on it, the outside strings. And I've followed all the way down to this line. I've marked this at 90 degrees to my center. This is the body line for a particular 14 fret or 12 fret instrument and a specific scale length. Pardon my sensor. It's telling me that someone is driving in. Continuing down the center line, I mark the E position for a 24.9 and 25.4 scale length, and I write down on here what my string spacing is at that position on the bridge. All useful information. You may want other information, but I find this to be perfectly adequate. Now, here's another example where I put the sound hole on it just so that I could get an idea of what things look like, but it's the same idea. Here's an 8-string bass guitar, 34-inch scale, and I did the same thing. Fingerboard taper, everything I need, all of the information is there. And then I suppose, just to be economical, on the back side of that, I designed the headpiece, and I even laid out where my tuners are going to go, which I think is a great idea. I lay that headpiece out, and I want to get the tuners on there. It's an aesthetic thing for me. I hate it when a tuner is too close to the top, and I hate it when a tuner is too close to the bottom of the headpiece. It just looks really lame. So there's what you do to make those paper patterns. And you could make this all in one paper pattern, but I find it easier to do those separately. So once you have your half pattern made of your plywood, MDF, whatever you happen to have is good. Obviously then, once you lay up a top or get it glued up, you can then trace that out to begin the construction process so that you can make up whatever you need. And you may, on your paper pattern, you may want to trace out or lay out your bracing pattern. Now you can see this one is blank. I don't put my bracing patterns on my paper patterns or on my half patterns. And my reasons are really very simple. I vary my bracing pattern. That is, I will vary my X angle, I'll vary the position and angle of my tone bars, my finger braces, and so on, depending on the flexibility that I get from a top. I rattle that top to listen to it. I tap on it, I rub on it, I flex it, and if the top is very flexible, I may close up the X. I'm going to rotate those tone bars closer to a 90-degree angle to the center line. But this video is not about how to decide your bracing. I'm going to leave that to somebody that might be more scientific than myself. But you lay out, obviously, your back and top with this, but also that half pattern is then used so that you can make your body molds if you're making a body mold. If you're building maybe from some sort of a soletta, then you would even use that to lay out that device, your soletta. It's very useful. And you can also, from your paper pattern for your neck tapers and so on, you can then, I wouldn't trace it, but you could transfer those measurements now to a piece of thin material like this plywood, and you can make fingerboard tapers patterns. I have a video on making those, I believe. Um, and all of this becomes useful information too, and very handy for shaping, layout, comparing, and so on. It's very useful stuff. So I know this might be a little bit sketchy, and if you put in the comments a question or two, or if you tell me, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I'll try and explain myself. But I hope this can help to get you started, because I really encourage everybody, especially if you're beginning to make guitars, don't be afraid to design your own guitar. You really can have fun doing it, and there is nothing like having a guitar shape, a scale length, and all of those combinations that you need to deal with that are just yours. Um, you don't need to build OMs, you don't need to build dreadnoughts, and you can, but everybody's already done that, so nothing wrong with a little adventure. Thanks for watching this. I hope you'll put a like on it, maybe subscribe to my channel. This is Kevin Ledoux, the Pragmatic Luther at Ledoux Guitars, and reminding you once more, the largest manufacturer of guitars in the entire town of Triangle, New York.